All right, thank you everybody for attending. We welcome USA 500 members, and it looks like we may have some people from the public here as well. So thank you for joining us today and carving out some time to hear this important information. My name is Rich Wallner. I'll be co-hosting today, and my day profession is financial planner, but lately I've just been responsible for trying to put this together. So this is taking my job.
Thank you, Rich.
You've done a good job too.
Yeah, thank you. As you may be aware, we encourage anonymous registration, so we're only recording the presentation itself. And once we get to Q&A, we will shut off the recording, so you can feel free to ask in anonymity and not have any worry about violating that confidentiality. Our agenda is going to be a spirited 2 15-minute sections followed by a Q&A. We're going to be doing a live Q&A. If you want to put some things in the chat, that'll be fine as well. But we prefer that at 2:30 we do a live session at that point. At the end of our session, during the Q&A, I will post some extra documents that we're going to refer to throughout. I can't do it while I'm doing the slides; a little bit too much for me to handle. So I will start to put forward some documents at the end, and also we will follow up with a email to everybody, again anonymously, where we'll send you the materials that we refer to, so you have extra information to go to. Our panelists today are all members of the Family Law Consortium. They're all experts in their field with extensive experience, and they're passionate about raising awareness of divorce issues and exploring newer trends in how to have a successful outcome in a difficult situation. We're going to go pretty quick through this because we don't have much time, so we will introduce each panelist throughout the presentation. So let me get started first with introducing Cindy Runge. Cindy Runge is an experienced family law attorney focused on divorce litigation, mediation, and collaborative law. She has experience working with victims of abuse as well as state intervention cases. And Cindy is also the co-facilitator for the Family Law Consortium. So Cindy, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Rich. So welcome everybody, and just wanted to welcome you to the first part of, we have 2 webinars about divorce, and today's is about domestic violence and financial safety, domestic abuse and financial safety. So a little bit about the Family Law Consortium. So we're a group, and we exist within USA 500, we're a roundtable. And our mission is to collaborate with highly skilled family law professionals or different disciplines, and to educate each other with a focus on further strengthening and deepening our connections. We strive to leverage our relationships and develop robust cross-referrals within our family law roundtable and with other USA 500 members. So our group is very dedicated to family law issues, working with people who work in the family law space. And our hope is that this practicum is going to provide you with information that you need to know now because of COVID-19. So specifically, the first section is going to have to do with safety first, domestic violence, and how it's on the rise during COVID-19. And then we're going to transition the panel over to Karen Levitt, Rich Wallner, and Janice Berner, who are going to discuss financial safety. So before we get started, I want to introduce my co-panelist for the Safety First emergency section of the program. Sonia Starnes is a family law attorney with Sheehan, Schiavone, Jutras, and Maggiochetti, where her practice focuses on divorce, modifications, contempt actions, paternities, as well as prenuptial agreements. Sonia is going to talk about the types of emergencies that are currently heard by phone. Sonia?
Thank you, Cindy. So at this point, the courts are still closed generally physically to the public. So whereas before, filings could be done in person or could be mailed in, now they can still be mailed in, but they certainly cannot be provided in person. So instead, the courts provide e-filing, but e-filing and snail mail are not necessarily the best options for an emergency filing. So during this COVID time, courts actually have accepted filings by fax or email, but it's very court specific. So during this time, I highly recommend that if you do have an emergency filing, that you call the court first to find out what their preference is. I recently had a I had a case in Lawrence, and when I asked whether they would accept a fax filing, I was told that their fax machine was down and that they would prefer an that they would prefer email. So it would be unfortunate if somebody's emergency motion or emergency request was held up because of a faulty fax machine. So I highly encourage everybody who does have an emergency that needs to be brought before the court immediately, that they call the court first and ask for what the preference is for filing. So that goes into the next section as to what constitutes an emergency that is currently scheduled for a telephonic hearing by the Probate and Family Court. So there are 4 different types of requests that are currently scheduled on emergency basis. The first is an abuse prevention order, or a request for an abuse prevention order. It is more commonly known as a restraining order, and that is where a victim has to show that there is abuse and that the abuse occurred between family or household members. Massachusetts law defines abuse as attempting to cause or actually causing physical harm, placing someone in fear of imminent serious physical harm, or causing someone to engage in sexual relations without their consent. The abuse has to occur between either family or household members, and those can be married couples, people living in the same household, or people who have a child in common, even if they do not actually live together. The burden for succeeding on an abuse prevention order is high, and I therefore recommend that whoever is looking for an abuse prevention order, that they, in conjunction with their attorney, work together to file a very detailed statement outlining all of the reasons, all of the facts that to support the request for an abuse prevention order. The second type of request that is heard on an emergency basis is a motion for an order to vacate the marital home. This type of situation comes up where parties who are contemplating a divorce or have already filed for a divorce are still living together, and one spouse feels that they just aren't safe with the other person still living in the home. So the person that's looking for such an order has to prove either that their own health, safety, or welfare is at risk with that other spouse still living in the house, or that the safety, health, or welfare of one of their minor children that are living with them is at risk with that other spouse still living in the house. Again, as with the abuse prevention orders, I highly recommend that anyone seeking this type of order is working closely together with their attorney to flesh out the facts and the reasons for why such an order is necessary. In order to file a motion for an order to vacate the marital home, a divorce action has to already have been filed, or it has to be filed in conjunction and served in conjunction with the motion for an order to vacate the marital home. And with that, I'm turning the presentation back over to Cindy Runge, who will be talking about emergency motions for temporary orders and contempt and other options for people that are, for whatever reason, unable to get into the court system.
Thanks, Sonia. So, of course, we have to apologize because we're giving you this presentation at a very high level, so we can't get into a lot of the detail, but just overall, going back to that slide previously, the 4 matters, that are considered an emergency. I'm going to talk about emergency motions for temporary orders. So sometimes you have a case where you have a party who is in fear of the other party, but you may not have enough evidence to meet the very high standard that you would be required for an abuse prevention order. That doesn't mean that that you don't have a good case. It just may mean that you have to take the next step, which would be to file a complaint in the Probate and Family Court and try to obtain emergency motion for temporary orders. So in that case as well, it's really important that the client provide you with a lot of detail. So I always ask people to write me a narrative, because usually when they're talking to you, they're very upset. They don't always remember to give you the detail, but somehow when they write it down, there seems to be a lot more information that you can get, so you can help them with their affidavit. And so, if it's a divorce situation, then you're going to be filing a complaint for divorce. You're going to be e-filing, all of these things. And every court has a slightly different procedure. The rules, for the pandemic are changing fairly regularly. And so you have to go to a website. We can provide you with that information following the webinar so that you know where to send everything, where things are going to be e-filed. And then the court will get back to you as to whether or not, you've met that standard. I also want to briefly touch on contempts. And so a contempt occurs if you've already got an order from the court and someone has not, the other party hasn't complied with it, there may be certain situations where you're going to need to file an emergency motion to deal with a contempt issue. Now, if it's something like, missed parenting time or a late child support payment, the court probably won't consider that an emergency, but definitely want to check in with an attorney if there's a pattern going on. But basically, during the pandemic, you're still, I want to go to the next slide if we could actually. And the one after that. Right. So, you're still going to have to follow court procedures. And so if, for example, if you're going to be filing a contempt, you have to file the complaint and you have to get the summons and complaint served on the other side. Some document production is still going to continue on with some of your cases, but protocols are going to vary from county to county. So you want to be familiar with the county that you're practicing in. There are procedures in place to help protect domestic abuse victims, such as impounding addresses. And if we could go to the next slide. These next, I think, 2 slides were provided to me by Laverne Gordon from Love Life Now Foundation. And she helps victims of domestic abuse. Her organization does. She's a fantastic speaker, very engaging. She provided these tips, and I just want to hit some of them at a very high level here, but knowing your abuser's red flags, being ready to leave at a moment's notice. She talked about, making sure that your car is facing, the exit, so like in a driveway, making and memorizing a list of emergency contacts, because, prior to the pandemic, people might have the opportunity to make a phone call when their abuser isn't there. But now, there's a lot of less opportunity for that because some people are they're still living with their abuser or they're in the house all the time. So if we could go to the next slide as well. Just wanted to point out that there are domestic violence agencies and shelters that are available. We can provide this information to you following the webinar. SafeLink is operated by Casamerna's DV agency. And I'm being very mindful of my time. I want to move on to the last slide for our section. That the important thing to know when you're dealing with emergencies and folks who need emergency service in a family law matter is you need to know what resources are available. Depending on the relationship between the parties, there may be other options available to them. Unless domestic violence is a factor, but knowing what resources are available is going to be key to helping the parties advocate for themselves. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Karen Levitt and her group.
Great. Let me just introduce Karen. Karen Levitt is the founder and principal of the Levitt Law Group of Chelmsford, Massachusetts, where she concentrates in divorce and family law. Karen focuses on dispute resolution out of court. She is also co-facilitator for the FLC and just recently celebrated 35 years of providing legal counsel to her many, many clients over the years. So Karen, there you go.
Thank you, Rich. We're going to start now about financial safety as opposed to physical safety. It's amazing how many people come to our offices and have so much misinformation about finances, which is obviously a critical component in divorce. So we're hoping to provide some information that will help them avoid some costly mistakes, particularly during these desperate times under COVID. So what is financial safety and why does it matter? Divorce is a major life event for people. Contrary to popular belief, sometimes none of the clients that we ever speak with come to this lightly, and it's really a scary and stressful time for them. I had a client recently who said to me he just felt paralyzed and in limbo. Everything in divorce can be affected. Where people live, you know, they're dividing their assets, so what funds they're going to have to provide for themselves and their families. Their income is may be divided because they have to pay support, or someone may have no income and is worried about how much support they're going to receive. They have to talk about what's going to happen with their kids, or they can continue to have health insurance. I mean, all of these things are running through their minds in addition to finances. You can imagine how scary and stressful that can be. So how do these issues show up in divorce? As Cindy and Sonia just talked about, domestic violence. Often domestic violence victims don't proceed with divorce and stay in their situations because they have no financial safety net, or don't know what financial safety net they would have in divorce. So people can have threats of domestic violence or other threats to them about their financial well-being that creates financial safety issues. Clients often lack control over finances. They may not know anything about their finances or have not confidence about how they manage them. Even if they're good with money, they may not have been the financial manager in the family. And this can result in poor decision-making with obviously lasting effects and consequences in divorce. Sometimes people have unrealistic expectations because they really don't understand the financial issues. And both clients always have uncertainty and fear about their future and finances, because they know in divorce you're taking one household, creating two with really no more money or resources. And COVID-19 heightens those financial safety concerns because it creates even a greater fear of the unknown than clients already have. COVID, as we all know, has created a lot of financial instability for people and uncertainty. People's asset values are changing on a daily basis, sometimes dramatically. And we have clients who have loss of job or job reduction, or they have interference in job performance. People who are working from home, who have kids at home, they may not be able to do their jobs as well as they usually do, and may fear they're going to lose their jobs. All of these things during COVID are just heightening people's financial safety concerns. So what happens when people come into our office? What's a typical encounter that we have with clients? First of all, we have to remember that clients are overwhelmed. There's a lot of research out there about the impact of how emotions impact reasoning. Clients don't always know what is important, or what they're supposed to tell us, or what they're supposed to ask about. They often ask about finances, obviously, and we give them information about that. And we also talk to them if they are going to have a court filing. There's a court rule called Rule 410. We're going to provide that documentation at the end of this program. In court, there is at least a minimum mandatory disclosure of financial information requirement. People can get much more than that, but at least it provides for people to have a basic exchange of financial information. Financial safety concerns sometimes are very overt by clients. They speak them and ask them and talk about them, but they can be quite subtle. Sometimes people's lack of knowledge, their fear, or even their culture may affect how they think about or can talk about finances and what their financial safety concerns might be. And I think it's really important for lawyers to educate clients, at least in that first consult as best we can, about how the law applies to their case and their finances, so that they have when they walk out the door, they have some sense of what financial safety could look like for them, what the options are. This gives clients a good grounding so that they at least feel they have a path forward. Unlike that client I mentioned, they don't feel like they're in limbo or paralyzed. They know how to move forward and how we can help them. And then consider third-party professionals who can assist us in the client, like financial professionals, who obviously their training and their expertise is in financial safety. And although we as lawyers can give them some basic information and certainly have experience to address these, there are many financial issues that really require a third-party professional. And now I'm going to turn it over to Janice.
Oh, actually, I'm just going to jump in here for a second. Just one little in between. I've full confession, I've been married before, and I'm on my second marriage, and everything's working out great. But I remember in my first marriage, what you heard is all the, the blue skies, everything's beautiful, it's all about love, community, everything else like that. But nobody ever walks you through what's on the other side if things don't work out. And you kind of forget that you're entering a partnership, basically, a legal one and a financial one. So when you're stepping out of a marriage, you really, it's really important for all sides. And I really adopted this in my first divorce, hopefully last one. And so, you know, you're really trying to come at it with a point of view of being fair and equitable. You want to come out of it with full transparency, and you want to feel like at the end of the day, even if you go separate paths, that you each treated each other fairly, and that everything was equitable, and there was no like hidden agendas. And so, of course, it's a very personal thing. It's hard to separate the two, but you know, and financial issues especially are very, very vulnerable issues. But it's really important to go through a process in the business world that is due diligence. You go through that process, and you have a better chance of having a successful outcome at the end. So, I just wanted to slip that in as my one slide of the entire webinar. So I'll now introduce Janice, who is a certified divorce financial analyst and a certified public accountant, very unique skills for a person who is a financial advisor. And she also has a prior background in counseling. Janice helps clients navigate life changes such as divorce, widowhood, retirement, and career transition. Janice,
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, everybody. Oftentimes I'm asked, what does a financial planner do? It may be a parent, but the financial planner provides support and works with you and your divorce team to quantify your financial status and help you manage your new financial life so that basically your money outlasts you. We are oftentimes one of the first professionals that you go to when you're considering divorce or when you're already divorced or you're in the middle of it. So you're going to be going through a lot emotionally. That makes it pretty hard to pull together all of your financial information, organize it all in your head. And it's also because we're specializing in that, right? It's what we do every day. So we help to get you organized before you make the big decisions. And that's so important because it's essential to protect your financial future. As everybody's been referring to divorce, it's a major life changer, both from an emotional standpoint, it could be physical location, expenses, all of the above. So it's very important that we consider all the scenarios that could play out and let you know how that would look as your new future. So we want to quantify your financial position first, tell you what you own and what you owe, help you think of things that you have not thought of, particularly expenses. Many times I'll have someone do a simple budget and they're shocked to find that after we meet, it may double or maybe 1.5 times what they thought it would be. And that's because, again, we see this every day and we know how to help you avoid big mistakes. Okay, next slide. Can actually help you save money, obviously. I know sometimes people are a little bit hesitant to go see another specialist, but when you're going through a divorce, if you make the wrong financial decision, believe me, it could impact the rest of your life. So you want to be careful that you are not being penny wise and pound foolish, I guess, to keep it basic. We do look at all potential settlements. We're working closely with your attorney so that we're not working in a silo. We sketch those out for you. Things like, should I keep or sell my home? Or for somebody already divorced, should I buy a new place or should I rent for now? Before basically we make a big mistake. That's a perfect example of one that could go wrong. And then COVID related, right? A financial planner in general, not just in divorce, is helping people prepare for the worst. That's what financial planning is. Things go wrong, things surprise us, we're still going to be okay, but we're not going to know that until we actually run it through all of our analysis and our computers and come out on the other side after everything from market volatility to potential illness in the family that could happen in the future. The unknowns just can't be put on the back of an envelope. And the reason why all this is so important to you is because these are your goals, right? So a large part of my practice is spent in the beginning talking about what matters to you and why. I want to know your story. I want to know how you paid for college, for example, and why then it's so important to you to pay for all of school for your kids. By doing that and actually going through your story will help match up your goals that are priorities to you to your financial resources. Okay, next slide, please. Finally, when do you go see a Cdfa or a financial planner? It is never too late. At the beginning, we're helping you organize all your documentation, talk through all the scenarios. During the divorce as well, we're doing that same thing. But if we come in at the end, we're there to help you deal with your new financial situation, all the pros and the cons, and help you make good decisions so that you live the best life you can without fear of running out of money. And on the flip side, if you do have quite a bit of money now, how do you maximize that, and how do you deal with the unexpected? Even a lot of money, there's not as much money where we're going through major life surprises such as a job loss or reduction, or a premature death of an ex-spouse. That's another thing that we work on a lot. It's just showing people what that would look like. Practical advice, and I'm looking at my time here too, but these are just little things that I think of. You know, I always tell people build a savings account, a healthy one, as you're preparing for divorce. Seek out emotional support, though I do have a counseling background that people always turn to us and attorneys to just talk things through. It really helps to have another party to talk to, so don't hesitate. Get your own credit card in your own name. If you don't have one, you need liquidity. Not that I recommend using it, but it's a good safety net. Have a post office box for private delivery of documents from people that you're going to be getting things from, and you don't want to work at home on these things, potentially, especially if there's something going on with domestic violence. During COVID, you're going to have to probably be more discreet because you're living under the same roof. So gathering documents, which is our next and final slide, we can move on to the next slide. You want to be careful that as you gather your documents, you may want to do it when your spouse is not at the home. That way you're not kind of stirring up the pot. Which is not something you want to deal with right now. I think nobody can really kind of leave home much. Okay, so finally, not to rush too much, looking at our time here, key documentation to pull together. Rich will be posting a couple of lists. One is the full financial planning list of the documentation you would need for a planner. Little caveat on that, that's part of our job, is to help make that easier on you. So it's in bits and bytes, but we help you with all that. Don't be intimidated by the list. But then secondly, there is a list out there prioritizing documents for a divorce that Karen has given us. And that one's really important to know about as well. It'll include everything from stock options to 5 years of asset statements. For a financial plan, if I had to prioritize, you see here on the slide, I'm dealing with at least a year of asset and liability statements, including everything from credit cards and mortgages and private loans, and then tax returns, at least the past couple of years. But in the case of divorce, it would be 5 years. Just think of ins and outs. Pay stubs are important to gather. Sometimes those are electronic now, so you may have to be gathering passwords and kind of knowing how to get to that information so that you've got kind of a family picture. And many times, by the way, I see both individuals, husband and wife. So, and then we talked about it earlier, but your annual budget and your expenses, you'd start it off, but it would be a real conversation with you to help you kind of identify the missing pieces that would kind of come out in the wash for me, because as I do your financial statements, it'll be really apparent to me that we're missing some things. So I think at that point, I'm at a good stopping point. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to pass it back to Karen.
Okay, so you've heard from all of us, and basically what we're really trying to give you, the client, is what we call a life preserver to help you swim safely to shore so that you can secure both your physical safety as well as your financial safety. And in order to do that, you need to know, for us to help you, we need to help you to what you need to know and what you need to do. So a couple things, I think we've all covered this, but to be proactive and prepared, understand how the courts work in domestic violence situations and how you can access them, understand what you may need to do or how you get help with regard to financial safety. We want you to help make informed decisions about whether to get divorced, when to get divorced, and how to get divorced. We're going to put a plug in for our part 2 of this Families First program, which is scheduled for July 2nd at 2 o'clock. Some other members of the Family Law Consortium are going to address some of the different processes for getting divorced. And the financial safety concerns as well as the physical safety concerns that we've talked about absolutely inform clients about what process they might choose to use or what process might actually work best for them. Not all processes are best for all people, and certainly when there's domestic violence, you have to think about process as to people's safety. And also help advise clients when to seek third-party advice, when do they need the help of a financial professional or business evaluator or anything to do with financial safety concerns. As attorneys, as I said earlier, we can certainly help people with many things, but it's not, certain things aren't our expertise, and clients sometimes need for that financial security to have more information from third parties with whom we as lawyers work with the clients to hopefully maximize the information that they receive and to help them make informed decisions. And I know this phrase is used over and over again, we are all in this together, but that is how we all feel as panelists in terms of these issues about physical safety and financial safety. And now we're going to open it up to questions. We hope people have some about what we've talked about. So questions, anybody?
And I can't see, so.
Can you hear us, Rich?
There are no questions on the chat. This is Joe. I'm looking at the chat box.
Oh, okay.
And if you close leave the presentation up, but because we can't see the screen while the presentation's up, if anybody has a question, go ahead, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question.
And I can close this down too, Joe, if we need to.
I actually had a question for Cindy and Sonia, which occurred to me as I was listening to their presentation, was if people get a restraining order, you know, are they still being served pretty timely? I mean, in terms of COVID by, I know they're normally served by a police department. So are they being still served timely on the recipient of a restraining order? You know, what would we tell our clients about that part?
The procedure hasn't changed. They still need to be served by the police department. You know, is everything a little delayed? You know, maybe, you know, we certainly try to get everyone served as quickly as possible and within the constraints of what's ordered by the court. But there, you know, I think it's inevitable that under the COVID situation, some of the times it's not as timely as it was before. But it's still, the procedure has to be followed. And in my experience, it hasn't been a huge delay. It's been, you know, relatively within the required time frame. Cindy, I don't know if you've had a different experience.
I've had a similar experience. So, I mean, I've had 2 emergencies that all sort of in the same period of time. And the first involved a restraining order, and that was served timely. And then another emergency, the court gave me the order at noon and said it had to be served on the other side by 4. And so it got served late, but they showed up and I emailed on time, you know, but it's like you say, it's just, there's only so much you can humanly do. So we just do the best we can.
Can any of you speak to how the telephonic hearings are going with the courts? Because that's completely new, and courts aren't always technologically up to date.
Sonia, you want to go first?
Sure. I've had one telephonic hearing so far, and I think that it does pose certain difficulties because you're unable to read the body language of the judge. You know, you're unable to elbow your client in the ribs if, you know, they're starting to say something that, you know, really shouldn't be said. And it's so easy to talk over each other. So, you know, everyone was trying to be respectful, and when they were done talking, you know, everyone else tried to give, you know, have a 10-second delay before the next person started talking. But then when everybody does that, you know, the next sort of round of discussion is, you know, ends up being talking over each other. So from that standpoint, I think it's more difficult. I was surprised. I mean, I've heard about people being told that they have a telephonic hearing, they're on the court all day, and then find out that their hearing got canceled. Thankfully for me, that was not my experience. My phone hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock, and at 9 o'clock, the judge, you know, my client and the attorney on the other side were all on the phone call. And so that went through timely, but I've heard of nightmares in that regard. So I'm interested to hear from other people as to what their experience has been with telephonic hearings.
Well, I actually haven't had one yet. I have one coming up, but I have heard from some others that it's still so important to just make sure and work with your client and the lawyers as well, that you know, if it's being done by Zoom, for example, that you know how to use it. Someone told me about an attorney who took like 20 minutes to actually connect to the telephonic hearing, which isn't going to make too many judges very happy and very frustrating. So, you know, that's just to remind us to try to work with our clients, do a practice with them maybe ourselves, just to make sure we know how to use the technology, as do the clients. It's not going to necessarily prevent all glitches, but I think it makes people less nervous too, particularly clients who haven't done this before. You know, they're nervous already to be in front of a judge. So if they're a little more comfortable by technology, that's really helpful.
So if it's okay, I can jump in on 2 of your issues here. On restraining orders, I had one hearing on the same restraining order in 2 different courts on the same day, the district court decided to punt to the probate court hearing in terms of modifying it for the parenting issues. The district court, because we had extended it by agreement, actually emailed me or faxed me a return of service for me to fill out, which I then faxed back to the court with language that said not accepted service via fax or email due to COVID-19. And the probate court, Judge Black didn't want to do that. They had it faxed over to the police, and it was served within a couple of hours, no different than if we had been in before COVID-19. Regarding telephone hearings, if you have an interpreter, you have to remember to stop speaking every 2 sentences, because unlike in a live hearing, the interpreter can't talk to the person who needs the translation while you're talking. So it tripled the time of our hearing, because I had to stop speaking, other attorneys, the judge had to stop speaking to give the interpreter time to interpret and then tell us if the individual had anything to respond. The telephone hearings, I've heard a couple of people who did say they were online waiting. I can say I've had 4 or 5 telephone hearings, and most of them have gone on at the time when they said I was going to go. I did have one hearing where they basically said, look, we're going to call you when we get to you, and they then emailed me at 9:30 saying, we're going to get to you around 12:30, we'll call them then. And they did. When I called in at 12:30, they got to me at that time. So that's at least been my experience so far. And I have heard some rumblings that Zoom hearings are going to be increasing with a combination of telephone hearings, depending on your judge and your courthouse.
Great. Thank you, Eric.
Welcome.
I'll just point out, until we take another question, that I posted the 5 documents in the chat. So if you want to pull any of those down, this would be a good time to do it. They're all important documents, so I wouldn't point out one versus another. So please go over there and go grab them. Other questions or observations?
I had 2 comments. One to what Janice was speaking about. I had a client call me, and I know she had been thinking about divorce for the past 4 or 5 years, and things spiraled out of control with the quarantine. There was just so much tension in the house, and it hadn't spiraled to the point of actual physical domestic violence, but it was awfully close and certainly emotionally abusive. And this woman, whom I've known for years, was about to cash out the very few 401ks that they had in order to come up with a retainer, because she thought, oh, that's what I have to do to get this going. And I was like, wait a minute. And I connected her with a financial person from USA 500 to help her sort of sift through the morass of financial stuff and make wiser decisions, so that she wasn't getting the penalties and the losses. So it's really critical when people are in that desperate state to get them to talk to financial people who can help them make wise decisions. The other thing is, I have gone to a lot of court-sponsored presentations, and what's really clear, this number stuck in my head. When the courts closed in March, I was listening to a presentation by the Middlesex judges, and they said that in an average week, a judge has 120 items on their calendar that they process. So if there's 8 judges in a courthouse, then you're over 1,000 things that every week are getting postponed and backlogged. And so the message was, if you have clients who are on the brink of divorce, who want that to happen, get them to file now. They're not going to get the immediate getting in for a motion for temporary orders or those kinds of things. And little flash to part 2, they have other ways that they can address those immediate issues. But by not filing now and putting it off because the courts are closed, they're going to be so far behind, because there's going to be this massive backlog.
Yeah. The other thing about that, Karen, is that in terms of collecting financial information, you know, sometimes if information isn't forthcoming, the filing of a divorce and the triggering of that Rule 410 mandatory disclosure requirement can help force the exchange of information sooner. And because of COVID, I mean, some offices are, you know, have, like your CPA offices have less staff, so it may take a little longer to get financial documentation. But, you know, filing not only can help move it forward for parties, and they can still work on settlement. There's nothing, you know, you can still do all those things, but you may have some greater tools to ensure, for in terms of financial safety, that you can get access to documents.
And it also institutes the Rule 411 financial restraining order.
Correct.
So that can be really helpful so that the
Right.
other party can't start spending away money
Yeah.
with no accountability.
For those who don't know what that is, Rule 411 is another rule, and I should have mentioned it during my presentation, which is not a personal restraining order, but an asset restraining order between the parties. It does allow them to use their funds for the ordinary course of living, so there's some exclusions where certain types of expenditures are allowed, but in essence, it maintains the status quo as to finances to protect both parties.
All
They
right.
can pay their attorney fees, though.
That's true.
All right. We've reached the end of our session. Thank you, everybody who came to visit us and hear this. We hope you found it useful. And thank you for the panelists for doing a sprint.
Rich, may I step in for just 1 second?
Absolutely. I was going to thank you, Joe, for giving us the opportunity to be able to even do this. So.
Oh, no, thank you guys. I just want to encourage, you know, one of the reasons we put together these practicums was to highlight our members, our existing members, their knowledge base, insights, you know, and their professional skills. As always, I encourage and I hope that all our fellow members who are on this call will reach out to these members who took the time to put this presentation together. You know, ask them any questions, follow up, and certainly engage them when other clients engage them if they have these kind of needs. They've clearly shown that they have a grasp of all of this. And if you're a non-member on this call, we encourage you to reach out. Rich, if you would, if it's not too much of a pain, put up everybody's contact information again, the final page of your presentation. And that way, before we shut down the meeting, you have a copy. You can do a screen. If anybody wants their information, please do a screenshot. I don't know how to do it on a PC, but on an Apple, it's Command-Shift-3, and it'll take a picture of all their contact information. And once again, we encourage you to reach out to these members. They are fantastic resources.
Actually, I will do that, Joe, but it's also the very first one in the chat box. The Divorce Webinar Part 1 flyer includes all of their details right there, so they can just pull that down as well. But I'll try to.
Even better. See, you're one step ahead of me, Rich.
Yeah, just trying to put it all together. But I will try to post this right here while we have a minute. But it's right there, and that's how you can get a hold of us. And you can always get a hold of me or Joe if you don't have that information immediately available. There it is, right there. All right, that's it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
All right, thanks again, Joe.
Bye.